Alright, Moses here. I saw everyone else's posts. I'm going to try to make this not too long. There's a lot going on in the discussion. A lot to talk about, actually. So the first thing I'm just going to do is I'm going to answer the questions posed by our professor. So the questions are, do you think that grammar is a relevant component of a language course? If so, for what kind of course? What would be the role of grammar in such a course? How would the choice of grammatical content be determined? It really depends on the situation, the context. Do you think that grammar is relevant? Yes, I do. However, I think it would be, for the most part, limited to situations. For all courses, it's useful. However, for situations where accuracy is needed more, it would be better for those courses. For example, courses that require a great amount of accuracy. An example would be, ESP, English for Specific Purposes. So, in this week's example, in our task regarding aviation, if we're looking at the aviation industry, in this situation, it would help for the students to be able to produce grammatically correct sentences, either orally or in written English. So I think those kind of courses would benefit with a bit of more focus on grammar. However, I still feel I do agree with Josh regarding that when it comes to class time, it should be based more on fluency and less based on grammar work. The role of grammar should be kind of like an auxiliary support, and it could be assigned outside of class for independent study as well as independent work, independent assignments, grammar exercises outside of the class that the students can do independently. And I think that would be determined by the needs analysis that the teacher will do for the student or for the class. And for an example, I'll give you an example of one of my students, and actually many students in Japan, and actually this was kind of brought up in the discussion, is regarding sentence structure and how Japanese usually have the verb at the end of the sentence, right? So actually I just had this situation happen today in my private business English class, where my student did the exact same thing. He put the verb higher at the end of the sentence, and he left out the higher who, higher what, which is common in the Japanese language, which Josh also mentioned in Arabic, that they leave out the subject sometimes. And Japanese does do that often as well. So I think that it would be determined by that. Okay, what do they need? Okay, this student needs, in my situation, my private student, he needs more focus on syntax. He needs more focus on grammar structure, etc. So that's just answering the first questions there. Now there's a whole bunch of other stuff after viewing Josh's videos as well as Michelle's. Josh, really cute baby, by the way. Anyways, so I'll start with Josh, just because I I guess I'm kind of leaning a little bit more towards uh, fluency over accuracy in the classroom. I agree on that point. Um, and however, Josh does make a point about meta language, and this is again for communicative purposes uh, that explaining grammar can be useful. So for actually in the situation that happened today in my class, that yes, uh, my student made a mistake in syntax, and I made him aware that okay, in English our verbs are usually not at the end of the sentence. We have to restructure that, and I made him aware that Japanese grammar and English grammar is different. So that's with the meta language. Uh, and also Josh was mentioning about classes being more teacher centered, and that's generally the case when it comes to grammar. Teaching grammar directly, it's going to be generally uh, teacher centered. At least that's what's happened in my cases whenever I teach grammar, and I teach it what Michelle was saying, synthetically, not analytically. In my context, where I'll stop the class and I'll say, okay, guys, we're going to look at this grammar point specifically right now and do some drills regarding that. And I teach a lot of young children, so I do agree with Michelle that children need to have that directness when it comes to teaching grammar. And an example that I do is actually explaining the difference between a and an for children. And I do that in English and in Japanese. I explain that, and it works out quite well, actually. Most of them seem to understand that. And that's just one example. So, continuing on, now, Michelle, you asked some questions. Just to ask your questions in regarding my situation, I would just personally focus more on fluency myself, because in the case of Japan, they are primarily taught grammar in their primary education. Uh, in Japan they need more focus on oral communication, the ability to speak and communicate. This is what they're lacking severely, and I feel that grammar is, yes, it's useful, and like in the case of my student today, sometimes it's difficult understanding what he's saying because the order is out of place. In instructing that specifically is useful, but I feel like they need um, more opportunities to practice speaking, which they don't really get in elementary school, junior high school, and high school. It's mostly just read, write, and study grammar points. So anyways, moving on to Michelle, some points that I was just after watching some of your videos. I found it was interesting that, okay, for you were talking about tasks in the article you were citing, and it was interesting that form is on the focus on the task that you were mentioning, because I thought, at least in the previous course that we studied in our summer semester, that when when students are focusing on tasks, it's more focused on negotiation of meaning, and fluency was simply trying to complete the task with or without correct form. So I don't know if you could give me a little bit of info on that. Um, and also, you talked about types of feedback as well, and you mentioned about corrective feedback in the form of maybe recasting, immediate corrective feedback. And I'm just going to ask, is immediate recasting required to complete the tasks? You were talking about tasks earlier. Can corrective feedback be given in a different form given the fact recasting has been shown to have a low uptake with learners? And that's actually from an article from our last semester. Oh no, my Adobe Reader just crashed. Give me a second, I could just I have to go open that up again. I forget the author's names. Sorry. Okay. I think that was in week. Where was that? Give me 1 second. I'm going to pause this. Okay, sorry, continuing. So it's patterns of corrective feedback and uptake in an adult ESL classroom. It's written by Panova and I may be mispronouncing his name here, Leister, 2002, and they basically said that immediate corrective feedback in the form of recast is one of the most common types of corrective feedback. However, it had low student uptake. Actually, they in the article, I believe they mentioned that the other types of corrective feedback that have more uptake would be not recasts. Basically, let's see here. Where was it? Can't remember off the top of my head here. Various. Okay. So it's not. I'll be right back. Just gotta find this here. Okay, I'm back. Sorry. So I just found it. It would be clarification requests, elicitation, and repetition, as well as the next one would be metalinguistic feedback as the next prominent indicators of learner uptake. And actually, connecting this to another point you made regarding CLT, communicative language teaching, being teacher-centered. There's a way around that, actually. And I do this in actually one of my classes. And I actually got it from last semester's discussion. It was ideas from other students as well that helped me with this. But in my classroom, in a classroom full of adults, we have it's basically oral. It's an oral communication class where we're discussing about different topics, and I listen to any mistakes that are made, and I jot them down, and I maintain fluency in the class, and I jot down the mistakes, and I write them down, and towards the end of class, I take a few of them as examples, and I write them on the whiteboard, and then I try to get the students themselves to self-correct each other's mistakes that they made in class. And this then is actually not teacher-centered. The students are engaged. They're the ones who are correcting themselves. The stronger students with stronger grammar are supporting the weaker students. Yes, of course, since how I am the teacher, I do have the final say regarding it, but I do think that it's not necessarily teacher-centered per se. In that regard, I'm still giving the students the ability to evaluate themselves, which you actually mentioned. That's another point where they could work in pairs, and I did like that point where they could work together and correct each other. So this is just a different way of doing that. So, anyways, I do agree. I do agree regarding synthetic grammar that it's better for beginners, and I do agree that some structures must be taught directly. And again, that was especially in the case of children. And I'm kind of repeating myself on that. So on that note, I will end that. And thank you. Sorry for the long video.